All right, and we've hit the 2 minute grace period. We've passed it. Just wanted to welcome everybody to office hours today. Thank you so much for attending. Today, I wanted to kind of discuss, as we talked about images on the last one, which is more than a couple weeks ago. We talked about the hardware, VM images. We talked about LX images, and what I wanted to talk about really quick was a little bit of the history of hardware virtualization in um, Triton, in Illumos, KVM, why we switched to Bhyve. And then it was brought to my attention yesterday by Brian. And I came across a little bit, but Brian I had informed me to I dug a little bit deeper about um, the original hardware virtualization implementation, which was a Zen based hypervisor that was in OpenSolaris with Sun. They ended up abandoning that before everything got switched with the Illumos fork happened, but there was an attempt to do that because they wanted something similar for the enterprise, right? Which was having hardware virtualization and have an alternative to Linux branded zones. And so, I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and ask, raise your hand, type in chat, whatever you need to do. Or if you have stuff you want to talk about or you have like ideas, go ahead and throw them out there. So a little bit of the why. I just here I'm going to read a little bit, but the history of the KVM port is interesting point in history for Illumos and Triton. It was a necessary entry to get Triton, SmartOS, and Smart Data Center at the time to be a true enterprise hypervisor. And its process and the pain that the developers went through also informed future decisions. And then Bhyve has been a great next chapter and is an example of Illumos and BSD working together as they have on things like ZFS, package source, dtrace, OpenSSH. Because one of the things with KVM was there was some friction between the Linux team and the Illumos team. I actually just watched Brian Cantrell's presentation at KVM. It was like KVM Con in Vancouver, and everything was roses and happy when it first happened. But as the chasm got wider, it became more difficult to work together on certain things just because of the differences. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about besides hardware virtualization, this will be at the end, is to touch a little bit on the future, which is Linux Compute Node. So Linux Compute Node, not hardware virtualization, but will provide a full Linux operating system that can be orchestrated by Triton. And I think this is going to be a great next chapter of Linux on Triton, and we're working hard on that. It's not general availability, but I wanted to tease it out a little bit just so you guys have an idea of what we have a little bit going on for the future and cool things that we're looking to crank out. So I want to talk a little bit, as I mentioned, the history of HVM on OpenSolaris. So, before the fork happened, before Oracle closed OpenSolaris, Sun had chosen Zen and did some work and created Sun XVM, which was a Type 1 hypervisor, and it used domains. So if you've used Zen in any fashion, you know a little bit about DOM0 and how that worked. And so that was Sun's choice, but they ended up abandoning that work. And I think I'm not sure the year. I have to look that up again. But obviously Sun had made multiple bets because they had purchased Innotech, who developed VirtualBox, and so they had multiple hypervisors and things that they had put bets on. And obviously Oracle.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
it it coincided with Oracle's purchase of Sun, because Oracle had already uh, an enterprise VM product that was based on Linux at the time, and they didn't want XVM with Solaris to take over that business. So they killed the one in Solaris and they kept the one with Linux.
Right, and I think we discussed it a little bit yesterday. Oracle to this day continues to offer um, some a Linux based hypervisor for some of their products that they certify, like Oracle database and other products that they offer on it. Um,
Yeah, it's called like Oracle Enterprise VM or something like that.
yeah, so they're
Um,
there was some conflict, right? It was like, they didn't,
Yeah.
they wanted their product to shine, and they wanted the technology from Sun, but I guess not everything. So um, that was, and then on top of that, obviously, Oracle chose to close Solaris altogether, right, and cease work on OpenSolaris, and the Illumos fork began, right? So that's where all of this, Oracle's development went one path, and then the development path of Illumos began. And so I'm talking a little bit about that as well. So the history of, and so I'm not going to talk too much about the Illumos fork itself. We can discuss that another time. But Smart OS and was one of the bets that Joyent made. They ended up a derivative of Illumos, and Joyent being a cloud offering, they needed to be able to offer not just Smart OS OS virtualization. They needed to be offer other operating systems to attract more customers and really make it a great enterprise product for Smart Data Center, which was the previous name of Triton at the time. And so the port began with Max Bruning in the fall of 2010, copying the bits from 2.6.34, getting it to compile on Illumos, and that was like basically I'm listening to the video. It's like it was painful. Like, yeah, it gets to compile, but it took them a while just to even get beyond like a BIOS screen, right? So this was a lot of work, and a lot of it was serial. So it was like they couldn't until you'll see here when Brian and Robert Mustaki joined in April. They really couldn't do parallel work until about that time. It was all like Max working on something, doing a bunch of work, and if you and I'll include some sources, of course, like in the video, and some links, but in some of the stuff that I watch. But Brian talks about like the if defs and the things they had to comment out and things they would hit while working on porting it. A big thing, dtrace was essential in the process, so that allowed and Brian was one of the inventors of that. It allowed them to look at the code as they were going through it and understand what problems they were hitting, right? And things that they could look at using the instrumentation was figuring out where things are different, where they're hitting certain problems that Illumos differs from Linux. And so they made progress later on after April, once they all got working on it. And then once they got to that, Linux, SmartOS, or Windows FreeBSD were tested as guest OS, so SmartOS itself, and they were able to work. Some of the cool things that kind of differed from Linux KVM, right, is ZFS. ZFS was obviously at the heart of SmartOS and Illumos, and that gave some really cool features that, there was OpenZFS, but not as big as it is now on Linux. But provisioning from reference images and the other benefits of ZFS that we know with data security, and being able to do snapshots and things like that. Zones provided the additional security with reduced attack vector. So if you look actually at the bottom there was, or no, sorry, it's on the next page, but there was some problems with some of the older hypervisors where people were able to break out of certain attack vectors, right? And zones, even if those things might have existed, zones was another gate to that somebody would break out and they wouldn't be able to go anywhere because zones provided that extra security. And then crossbow networking was great for the KVM guest for Phoenix. And then as SmartOS made the progress, they gave it back to the community. So other Illumos flavors were able to add KVM as it was added into Illumos in general. So OmniOS and other were able to do that. And then actually, yeah, let me just see here. Something in chat here. Dan typed in, Joyent actually obtained a patent on the double hold virtualization, right? Zones is one hole KVM, and later Bhyve is the second hole, and that's right. They obtained a patent on that, and so that was a cool thing as well. Was were the Joyent pioneering that as far as security, and so. Yeah, that was a cool thing there as well. So thank you, Dan, for that. And feel free to unmute if you have something too. If you don't have to just put it in chat. You can interrupt me. Okay, so how were there limitations with the port? Intel processors were only supported. And it was funny because Brian and I were talking about this yesterday, and like Intel was a big early investor in Joyent. And it's funny because in the video that I watched of Brian talking about this back in 2011, he was like, Andy Grove did not come in my office and demand that we only do Intel support. So that wasn't one of the reasons. It was really for ease of just the code at the time. But they didn't want to shut out AMD support. But as we know, AMD support did not materialize in KVM support. Networking was limited to 1 gigabit and CPU dependent. So even if you have a 1 gigabit NIC, if you have a small CPU instance, you may not even be getting close to that. Resizing was something that was wanted to be done, that didn't materialize as well. And then newer features that were in Linux were not backported as well. So the chasm between KVM as it got to newer versions, the 2.6.34 version that was ported to Illumos, it just there was this goal of having patches go back and forth, but it just didn't happen. It wasn't compatible, and it was too much. And so there was this idea of having that happen at the beginning, but it just did not materialize. And then PCI pass-through, which is another thing that was looked at and didn't make it. But these were all things that were desired and wanted to happen, but they were going to require something different. And so yeah, that was where KVM. And if you look at some of the articles, and you can look, I even saw some comments about just people's opinions, you see, as it grew older, it was just going to be harder to go do another port. So basically, if they wanted some of those features and things, it was going to be another major port, and we did not have the resources. Joyent did not have the resources to go and do that and stop what we're doing and do that. And so then there was Bhyve. So let's talk a little bit of history about Bhyve itself, which was Type 2 hypervisor written for free. Oh, did somebody want to say something, or did somebody just pop in? Type 2 hypervisor written for FreeBSD starting in 2010 by 2 NetApp employees. The nice thing, it was written to be legacy free versus things like Zen and VirtualBox. And what I mean by legacy free is VirtIO and newer drivers. So KVM, QEMU, VirtualBox, they all were written with these older pieces of hardware in mind that have to be emulated and have these drivers that are slow and actually can introduce vulnerabilities. And so Bhyve was interesting in that they started without having to have all that code that those other hypervisors had. And so, and I mentioned they're written to take advantage of VirtIO that was beginning to be ubiquitous on modern operating systems. So the VirtIO drivers allowed better speed and compatibility with modern hardware and modern operating systems. And so, even though there's hypervisors, there's plenty of people using it to do older versions of Windows and other operating systems, Bhyve was looking to the future when you're going to be running a modern operating system, or years later, those ones would be legacy, but they would have support. And this allowed for less code and avoided potential bottlenecks with other, as I said, low performance drivers. And then it allowed for avoiding high profile vulnerabilities, such as the QEMU Zen KVM floppy driver vulnerability, which we saw in actually, Amazon uses multiple hypervisors, but they did use primarily Zen, and they were subject to that floppy driver vulnerability themselves. So it was just a great thing that Bhyve started to be legacy free, and it gave an opportunity for FreeBSD to separate itself. And then, so Bhyve just happened to be being ported to Illumos. So began with Pluribus Networks in 2013. They were actually porting this code and for their needs, of course. And they contributed the code back to the Illumos community in September 2017, which happened to be right around the time that Joyent was looking at replacing KVM, or what was going to be our solution to the problems we had in KVM. And so they contributed that code back. We began working on the code. Joyent began working on the code to bring it up to date with Bhyve from FreeBSD 11.1 and brought some improvements along the way. Joyent had a Linux guest booting by October 2017 and semi-functional by November 2017. And there's a lot of great people that worked on that. Mike Gertz, Patrick Mooney, Hans Rosenfeld work on this. They had a great team doing some of these features here. And Bhyve was chosen to replace KVM as the primary HVM hypervisor in Illumos. And it enabled desired features such as PCI pass-through for NICs. So
PCI pass-through was primarily the need for PCI pass-through at the time was really a GPGPU. Oh my God, please, can we get GPGPU? Please, please, please. The GPU vendors are terrible about spec sheets or open sourcing things. So might as well just send it right to one where they have drivers for, binary drivers for already. So PCI, the PCI pass-through motivator was GPGPU. We can say that was easily the case. Less so.
because we have like, isn't it like it's correct me if I'm wrong, but like Nvidia is not keen to open sourcing their drivers.
Yep.
Notoriously, yeah.
Yeah, and when they buy companies that were good about it, they get less good about it. I'm not going to name any names, Mellanox, but yes.
Well, and I was going to mention Mellanox too, because in that NIC pass through, right, is that, for one of the things that if certain NICs or things that we may not have drivers for in Illumos, that you could run them with the pass through as well. So GPGPUs. And then I was thinking certain Mellanox, although we have Mellanox drivers for other things, but kind of some outliers with certain brands of NICs and things like that. But as you mentioned, Dan, yeah, GPGPU was a big driver for that. And then let me just check the chat really quick. Had they open source part of their display drivers? Yeah, I'm not sure on that. I can't speak to that myself, but I just know that as I've been watching, in fact, because some of the stuff I watch, like Jeff Geerling, who does all these experiments with trying to do GPUs on like Raspberry Pi, it's harder with the NVIDIA. He doesn't use NVIDIA on some of them because, he recompiles the drivers, things like that, but NVIDIA doesn't release all of that. So, but yeah, the main motivator being GPGPU. Also, AMD support came with that. And like I said, that was because it fit more in tune with what we were doing at the time without all that legacy code and obviously the shared BSD heritage. The Joyent team contributed zHive, so that's zone support for Bhyve, and integrated VM Atom. Bhyve gave significantly better performance than KVM from the very beginning, so that was a great thing as well. And enabled faster networking. And then, like I said, Illumos KVM by 2018 was fairly old, and resyncing would require another major porting effort, and that was just not, that just wasn't in the cards, and it wouldn't be worth it with the work we could do with the BSD team. The Bhyve license is compatible with Illumos, so it was able to be fully integrated, unlike KVM, which had to remain separate. And overall, Bhyve presented the ability to keep up to date with upstream changes in FreeBSD and for contributions to go back to upstream, unlike KVM. And so if you actually go to the Bhyve page, right, they mention Illumos on the official Bhyve page. So if you look at the KVM logo, which I put in there, you see Tux on there. So it's definitely a Linux product, and Bhyve, even that it originated on BSD, shares back and forth with Illumos, which is why I love our communities. I love that we work together on things because we know what each other's gone through, and on top of that, OpenZFS, all those things, these great tools that we have. It's great to share that work. And so there's actually like a weekly call and some other things that they have. There's a Bhyve Con, and Illumos is part of that. And of course, Bhyve, being that it came to not just SmartOS, but OmniOS and other Illumos flavors as well. And so it became the choice of hypervisor for not just SmartOS and Triton. And then Bhyve improvements continue with new features and bug fixes. FreeBSD and Illumos work together on features and improvements. Like I said, Bhyve is present on Triton Data Center, SmartOS, OmniOS, and Oxide, among others. And MNX and Triton Data Center are committed to Bhyve in its future as well. And so, we continue to put improvements to Bhyve where we can. I know other, like I mentioned, Oxide. Patrick Mooney is over at Oxide, and I think he's still involved with it there. He's probably doing other things as well, but I know he's still active there. And then, there's other contributors in the Illumos community that help with Bhyve as well. Like I said, OmniOS as well. So, and we're committed to its future as it's the main HVM for us. But I did want to talk about, so that's the history of Bhyve and KVM. Is there any questions, or does anybody have any stories? I know it's funny because we lived a little bit of it ourselves because I was at Joyent for some of it, but
somebody. Oh, it looks like Brian's going to answer it on chat. Never mind.
Okay, okay. Any idea when Oxide's work on Bhyve Live migrate can apply to Triton? And Brian's
typing, so we'll let that in chat.
I'll go ahead and just say it. Their userland stuff is Propolis, which is all written in Rust. So we would either need to take what they do there and like port that into the userland stuff that we have. So like the zhive command, or switch SmartOS over to using Propolis. Either one is a possibility, but neither of them are trivial tasks. So we'll see, is really where it's at. Once Oxide has basically like worked out the issues with it, then we'll try to figure out what's going on there. It's not really productive to try to hit a moving target on that. And so like if we're doing something completely different or if we, start trying to port what they're doing in Rust into the zhive stuff and then run into issues and like we fix stuff, but then they do stuff different later on, then that won't make it so easy for working together in the future. So we'll see. We're not sure yet, but it's something that we are very interested in bringing into SmartOS and Triton.
If you don't follow their Rust workflow, there's a real danger of ending up with like a KVM style situation again, though.
Well,
to be fair, there's a couple of things. They do have to introduce some modicum of kernel interface, which they upstream to Illumos. They were very good about that. And also, unlike KVM, they're not going to be resistant to questions, resistant to change. As someone who's ported something from Joyent back in the day, I found working with most the people who were, when I ported LX to OmniOS, I worked with a lot of the people who worked on LX when they were Joyent employees and I wasn't a Joyent employee. Those were very pleasant conversations. I can't imagine anybody working to either port Propolis or to find out what's going on with Propolis if it isn't obvious from a read. They'd be more than cooperative. I don't think there's going to be the cultural barrier is a big problem with KVM. I don't think that goes away with looking at what's going on in Propolis, in my opinion.
Yeah, and whether or not SmartOS is using zhive or Propolis is kind of a little bit bigger than just us, because Oxide is doing this new work in Propolis. Open Indiana and OmniOS are using zhive as we are.
It may not be exactly the same, but it's that class of userland. It's called C-Bhyve in generic Bhyve circles. C-Bhyve, yeah. Our Bhyve is the variant. Yeah.
it would probably be more of a situation where the entire rest of the Illumos community is going to go full in on Propolis, which could be really great. I don't like. I'm not really familiar with their implementation. They have their own like control plane of software, and it might be a case where like VMADM on SmartOS is really heavily engineered to work with the Triton control plane. And it's not so great of a like just standalone tool, you know. You can get the job done by feeding it handmade JSON, but it doesn't really do anything to help you out in that situation. Like it can validate a JSON payload for you, but it can't do something like create a VM interactively by prompting you for information or like passing all the arguments on the command line, right? It has to be all in JSON. And so I don't know how closely Propolis is tied with the Oxide control plane. And so if it's fairly generic with a nice interface that other things can easily consume, then that might be something that the entire Illumos community will switch to. But if it's really, really tightly integrated with their control plane and not so useful for the rest of us, then we probably wouldn't. So, but it'll ultimately be something that is SmartOS, OpenIndiana, and OmniOS will all together either go with Propolis or not.
And your example of VMAtom is actually a good one because OmniOS, after it became fully community, ended up creating a level of abstraction on top of the zone tools, which is what VMAtom uses under its hood.
Mm-hmm.
It has a new command set. It's called ZADM, I believe, ZADM, and it steals conceptual ideas from VMAtom, but implements them differently. Illumos distros may end up providing some of those. The whole question started about migration services. We may end up, re-implementing might be too strong of a word, but porting over some of those Propolis ideas in a completely different user runtime implementation. It's been done. It could be done again.
Yeah, regardless of which way it works out, the Oxide folks are almost certainly going to play a part in that. Based on all of my interactions with them, both from working with the majority of those folks at Joyent and post Joyent with them going to Oxide, and while I was still at Joyent and now at MX, like it's always been a really great relationship. So I have every expectation that when we get to that point where we're ready to start implementing migration on our side, they'll be as helpful as can be. So it's not something that I'm concerned about. It's just like once they've got it to a point where it's mature enough that we can start working on it. That's really the question is when rather than if.
I just have one completely unrelated question, and actually the answer doesn't really matter to me either way. I'm just curious. For really heavy lift stuff, like Propolis or anything like that, do you guys still intend to use like an RFD process, like just so the rest of the community can keep track of what's going on there?
Yeah, we will.
Yeah, if not that, the Illumos IPD one. It depends on domain it lands in.
Got it. Thanks, guys.
Right. Yeah, and if the Illumos community in general is going to go towards Propolis, there will be the IPD first, and then there will be a follow-up RFD for how we're going to switch over. And kind of the model for that is the way Illumos switched over to Loader instead of Grub. I don't remember if there was an IPD for it. I wasn't really involved with that side of things at the time, but loader was ported for Illumos and got working there first. And once that was like done with a bow tied on it, that's when Joyent started looking at moving Triton and SmartOS over to it. So it's going to be
the IPD process, but you're right. That's
Okay,
a great analogy. That's a great analogy
Yeah.
to use.
yeah, that would be kind of how it would play out. Is it'll be like wider Lumos first. Once all the issues are nailed down there, then we would look at bringing it into SmartOS and Triton. So, because we kind of like learned our lesson a little bit with LX. There was a bunch of stuff that went into LX and a bunch of stuff that Joyent did, like heavily focused on the cloud, and then a lot of that wasn't put back to illumos-gate. And after a few years, there was an effort at Joyent to try to get more stuff like put back, and so there was a bunch of things where we were copying them from Illumos Joyent into illumos-gate, and in some cases, the reviews there brought up some things and stuff that was seemed appropriate at the time in the context of the cloud didn't make as much sense for like general compute that is in Gate. And so there's a few places where we have divergences around like some metrics handling in a couple places. Like we don't want to do something where we're going to make a decision about how something has to be done because we want to meet our deliverable. But then the larger community decides to handle it a different way, and now we've got a committed interface that we can't just arbitrarily change. So we want to be as compatible as possible, and minimize those divergences between illumos-gate and illumos Joyent.
Thank you. And this is exactly why I said at the beginning, like how the history, informs our future decisions, right? We go back and look at choices and decisions that we made and say, okay, that was painful, or that worked out really well, or that was great for the community, or that wasn't so great for the community, and that's helps us inform future things that we're going to do and how we handle them. And I've read a little couple of things about like people looking at Propolis and things like that, and so a lot of the people at Oxide, right, are like Josh Clulo. They're all they're very heavily involved in the Illumos community as well. So it's kind of great because I think they're part of it too. So they're thinking of they have to wear different hats, like Dan will talk about. Sometimes you have to put on your Illumos community hat, right? Or you have to put on your primary work hat. So, we'll see what kind of comes out in the future. But yeah, this is why I wanted to talk about this stuff because it really, I was there at Joyent for part of it, and just going back and looking at the history and the things is really interesting to me. So, it's just going back and reading these articles and looking at the past is just interesting to me. I like computing history in general, but when it's stuff that really comes to what we're working on is also very topical as well. And is there any other? Oh, go ahead.
Another thing that you can see based on kind of our experiences with LX in the past and kind of the way like Joyent handled engineering. If you look at our change logs for the SmartOS releases, ways back, almost every item in the change log was an OS ticket in our Jira that we did to Illumos Joyent first, and then sometime later it might be put back into Gate. These days, when you look at our change logs, it's almost all Illumos changes, because pretty much like the entire community, like us, Omni, Oxide, Open Indiana, rather than contributing things to our own fork of Illumos first, we're trying to work as much as possible, like putting things into Gate first and then bringing it in, because the collaboration really is going to help us all out. We really only do things to our own forks first when something is either like already divergent or it's something that's not in Gate. Like I have a ticket that I just fixed for LX brand, which Gate doesn't have LX. Or wait, does it? No, I don't think it does. But
Gate does not
OmniOS
have
does.
LX. Omni does,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I already pointed them at your fix, so hopefully they'll suck it in real soon.
And right, so we've contacted Omni for that, but it's something that because it's not in Gate, we don't put it in. We don't open up a request for Gate. We do it into our own first. But pretty much anything that's not extremely specific to us is going upstream first and then coming in.
Yeah, we have a new to Illumos person who after this call I'm going to be talking with. He's going to be putting a small ZFS fix directly to Gate at some point.
Yeah, and even in some cases where it might be faster for us to just commit it in ours first and then get it out to Gate afterwards. Like we might be able to deliver the software to our customers a few days early, but it's actually like more work on us to go through all of that. So we're going through the process of getting stuff into Gate and then merging that in once it's integrated there.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like you said, there's those things in the past or choices that we've made before, and we're always trying to improve processes. And then when it comes to working with Illumos community in general, and in our own product as well. But yeah, it informs. Like I was saying, there was this kind of buddy thing for KVM at the beginning, but that ended up not materializing at all, and that just ended up with a version that was totally behind. And then with Bhyve, it's been a shared process. They were accepting patches in upstream, so it's been a better relationship. So that just goes to show you that software is coding, but it's people, right? There's people always involved, and people make the difference in these things. And so an attitude and relationship can make a very big difference in an outcome, and we understand that. And so we want to look for the best things for our customers, but also we like to have great relationships with the community and community members, and we like to have people that want to work on this and work on these products, because people with good attitudes and stuff like that makes a difference in how the output happens, right? So there's that human factor that is always a part of it. So this is why I think it's interesting and wanted to talk about it. That's pretty much what I had for the HVM. We did talk a little bit about LX. I didn't want to really put that topic in here. That maybe for another time. But I'm hoping people are aware of LX zones, and they're still being used, but they're a different topic, I think, for a different time. But I didn't want to leave them out in the cold. They do exist, and maybe we'll talk about that another time. But we did talk about the image process of making those images, as well as the HVM images, and so I wanted to touch on the HVM topic first. The next topic that I wanted to talk about is the future. Linux compute node. So I don't know, you may be aware of this. There is a page on docs.tritondatacenter.com that you can find out a little bit of information. So this is copied from there. But Linux compute node. So this is something coming in the future. So it's a full Linux installation, no software hypervisor, managed by Triton Data Center. So you have a compute node with a full Linux installation, In this case, it uses Debian as a base, and we're looking to Debian 12 in the future. And there's some, and this work started a few years ago, because this started at Joyent. I remember I remember Mike Gertz and some other people starting the work on this. And then, obviously MNX is working on it now. And so there's some goals with that. Linux Compute Node allows us to expand hardware compatibility list. And Linux Compute Nodes will run side by side with regular SmartOS compute nodes, and it allows you to determine the appropriate compute node kernel based on application needs. So as you look below, like things like Hadoop workloads, or other things that need like specialized hardware, or really Linux dependent application stacks that maybe need to take up more resources, those are going to be options. Provides a full hardware compute node for LXC and LXD containers. So besides just having the Linux installation, it also will give you the advantage of having real Linux containers on a Linux kernel that's going to be more compatible. And then Triton Linux Compute Node does not currently contain HVM capabilities and relies solely on LXC instances utilizing ZFS. But I won't rule it out in the future, I guess, but currently that's not something we're needing to do, because the HVM capabilities, as we just talked about, are sufficient on Triton. But this is kind of a different beast. But I think I was talking to Bruce, and he was mentioning something like that, and I said, I don't know, but that's not something right now. And then LXD images that you get from linuxcontainers.org or Canonical can be used. They maintain high performance, container architecture. We talked about that, offering increased compatibility with Linux kernel features. Things like IP tables, syscontrol variables, and of course our favorite friend systemd. And Linux Compute Node right now is in early active development, but we do invite community participation and looking at use cases and other things that we would, where we want to go on the roadmap, and compatibility issues and some testing. And right now, it's fully integrated into Triton Cloud API. Linux Compute Nodes are not fully compatible with all the features, though. However, we are working to close many of the gaps that do exist, such as Fabric and VXLAN networking. So Dan's been working on getting that going. There's some Linux naming things that make it fun, I'm sure. But there's some features and things that we'll evaluate as we get closer to that. I did want to have a demo, but the demo gods smited us. But one thing I will provide is a little bit of screenshots here, which is thanks to Travis, which is getting an image from linuxcontainers.org. So he has a Linux compute node, and he's pulling down a Debian 11 image, which he then so he downloads that from linuxcontainers.org, and you see it's the image using image API, and then provisions that image on a LinuxCN Debian container instance, and gets that up and running. So it's really cool stuff that's coming in the future. I'll provide the links in the video and stuff like that, but you can find the docs.triton data center. If you just search or look under operator documentation, you'll find LinuxCN and some of this information, and there's a couple of pages on there. I think Dan just put in the chat Dan just put in the chat the networking VARPD stuff that he was been trying to plumb up here, which is the VXLAN part of the VXLAN stuff, trying to get that working. This is stuff I'm really excited about. I know it's been kind of like in the oven for a while, because it's not currently our main focus or anything like that, but it's an idea that we've had for a while, and before we make it generally available, we want it to be great. And Travis, Brian, others have been working on it, and so as we get to close more of those gaps and get to closer to some features, we'll be releasing more information about that. But I wanted to tease it out, but I couldn't show you too much, so I want you to just get a little taste. So, but yeah, we'll be hopefully getting more of this as we get some, like I said, some features closed. So, that's pretty much what I had today to discuss. Is there any questions? Anything people want to talk about? No. Okay, let me check chat. Somebody's typing here.
You blew us away with your eloquence, man.
Any depths? Okay, cool. Yeah, and Marcel, I'm just gonna read your chat if somebody could pop it open. But I'm happy to help with any DAPI stuff related to LinuxCN. Just give me a ping if interested. Great. We all, like I said, we're looking for that too, is like contributions.
Jasper had a good question about unique selling points of LinuxCN. I think one of the biggest things there is hardware compatibility. Being able to have some hardware compatible, the Mellanox 400 gig drivers or something like that in the future, or whatever it is, might be one side. Some GPU related stuff. There's also some thought of bare metal Kubernetes using LinuxCN. That could, single tenant bare metal Kubernetes worker nodes. That could be kind of an interesting play on it as well, but that's a little further off.
There's also some proprietary applications that people have brought up running in the past that they would rather run on like with container performance instead of virtual machine performance. But then also, because it's a proprietary program, running on LX, if they have an issue and they go back to the vendor, like, here's this bug that we found in your program, the vendor's not going to listen because it's running on Illumos. And so they, people were wanting to be able to run on a real Linux kernel. So if you're wondering, it was Oracle database that they had asked about. But there's also, like, if you want to run like a Linux based firewall and use IP tables, but you want to be able to go at like wire-ish speeds rather than going through the virtualized networking in Bhyve or KVM. You can't do IP tables in LX, and people are not as familiar with IPF, and you can actually do some like really crazy things with Linux IP tables that IPF doesn't allow you to do. So there's a few edge cases like that where people would actually prefer to be running on like an actual Linux kernel on actual metal, not being virtualized. So there's those things too.
Yeah, another one that came to mind when we were playing around with it was, folks that are using Ceph and want some native near performance, that can play well for them instead of having it virtualized on top of Bhyve or something like that.
Yeah, but we'd like to be able to say to those customers, like, yeah, sure, you can do that here, and not, I'm sorry, let's not take your money, So instead of sending someone else out to, find a different enterprise virtualization solution, we want to be able to service those customers as well.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because, like, being able to have the great orchestration features of Triton and the way it handles your resources, and being able to see that and have those specialized workloads all in one place, especially things like the like some of the people that are taking advantage of the paid customers that have the user portal, things like that. They can go give their users or the consumers, a LinuxCN resource, right? And that helps with that operator not having to get complaints about something not working the same or things like that, right? That's another benefit, is being able to see those different resources in one single place rather than having to run maybe two different orchestration platforms or another hypervisor or things like that. So so I see that as an important one as well, is that, you know, when you are ready to add some specialized workloads or some Linux, you can just bolt it on to your existing Triton installation, and you're not having to go learn something new. You can still use all the same resources you already have and use the new resources that you have, and take advantage of that. So it's cool stuff. And like you said, the workloads, things like, I think I was just reading a thing about, you know, MinIO. People are wanting to, you know, bring storage back in house, like you said, Ceph, and or MinIO would be an option. Like you build something, and you can have your own, you know, S3 compatible storage application and still orchestrate the infrastructure the way that you like. So there's some really cool things about it. Let me just see if there's anything new in chat. Was that just the question? I thought either SAP or Oracle. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was thinking also like Red Hat, right? Too, is like, you know, like contracts for running that. But Oracle is the one that really, yeah, comes to mind. Like they license everything, right? So they want to know, oh, you're not running that on something certified. You're breaking your support contract. And Red Hat, similar things like that, right? So giving you the full Linux installation might help with people running enterprise Linux and want to run a real enterprise Linux installation, if maybe even Red Hat or something, and still get the orchestration. So maintaining two OS platforms would not be cumbersome in the long run. I don't know if anybody wants to address that question, but
I don't know if we're doing much building specifically for. I mean, a couple. The less platform specific stuff we have, the better. And a lot of what's different is container spinning on a LinuxCN versus VM Atom and VM Agent on SmartOS compute nodes. And then, you know, things like the LinuxCN VARPD are, I believe, going to be more exceptions than rules. And of course, I'm hoping that Linux doesn't change their interfaces for certain machine operations like plumbing NICs and dealing with them. Netlink seems to be relatively stable. You know, let's hope that stays true. You know, but
Yeah.
So
Yeah, largely our interface for LinuxCN is the LXC API.
Thank you.
Because the VM-ADM implementation that we have on LinuxCN has the backend for it is LXC, and so whereas on SmartOS, when you run a VM-ADM command, it's going to in turn run a zone config or zone ADM command, right? On LinuxCN, it's going to run an LXC or LXD command to do whatever. And so largely that's what we need to worry about. And it's just the interface that they have there. And it's even mostly just a matter of making the YAML config for the instance that we're going to pass into LXD, and then tell it like create this VM or create this instance for this YAML config. So, and beyond that, like we're mostly trying to be just like Debian 12 or Debian, whichever version, with some packages installed. So it's not really like maintaining an OS like as heavy as maintaining SmartOS is. And we're not really going to be looking at doing like much kernel development in Linux at all. Partly because one of the points for this is being compatible with the Linux kernel that everyone else is running. So like we don't want to have divergences there. We don't want to have differences in behavior where your application is going to experience a different set of bugs on our platform than it would on any other. If you just like grabbed Debian and installed it yourself. So we're like, whatever Linux is going to do, Linux is going to do, and that's the kernel that we're going to be running. But the LXC interface is primarily where we are meeting that platform. So
Linux, and then Marcel said cumbersome can also be made up is there's a larger market, and having a LinuxCN definitely opens a lot of doors, and that is true as well. Is because one of the things that I think we were looking at when we first started doing Linux compute node was that it is Triton itself can be ran on SmartOS, but people still do want to run Linux, other operating systems. But it's easier for some companies to find talent, right, that can work with Linux. And you could just run Triton as your orchestration layer and have Linux running, and you're going to be able to find talent to help maintain that, And so, yeah, it does open a lot of doors, I believe, as well. So definitely excited about that.
Yeah, and also, honestly, when we're having these discussions, even a checkbox that says, yes, it runs Linux, but they might end up never using the Linux compute node, it's fine. It got us through the door as well. So,
like you said, and that's I think that's what he's saying too. Yeah, it just opens the door, and then we're in, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely one thing too. Yeah, is it has sometimes it's a checkbox that we need. Like, what is SmartOS, right? No, this is orchestration and Linux. So, and we're not gonna hide SmartOS. We love it. I'm just saying that sometimes that might be the case. Or like, hey, this is this great orchestration layer. You can manage your resources, and hey, it runs full Linux, no difference. And so that's a thing too as well. So, but yeah, this is all like I said, the history, the future, all great stuff that I love to look at and think about and inform where we're going. And I'm excited for Bhyve where it's at, SmartOS where it's at and where it's going, and excited definitely for LinuxCN. Is there any other questions, or we're kind of ending the time here or nearing the end of the time, but is there anything else, questions or anything that people had, or if anybody wanted to say anything?
Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate everybody dropping in. I'll get the video edited and up, and I'll put the slides out as well. And then what I'll do with the slides too is I'll include a bunch of the sources that I know exactly. I have them written down, but the sources, so you can go back and read some of the articles or watch some of the videos that I watched to get some of this information, because it's really interesting stuff. A lot of if you like watching Brian Cantrell videos from 2011, careful, he does use some hard language sometimes, but he's very animated. But yeah, these I worked with some of these guys, and they're still in the community, and they're very responsive and stuff like that. So that's why I thought it would be great to talk about this. So yeah, thank you very much. And then I'll be on, like I said, I'll be thinking of the next topic here. If you have ideas, please just drop a note in Discord. And because I think what I wanted to do coming up was talk a little bit about maybe some different installations. So I've pinged a couple people about maybe talking about their Triton installation. So it's not 100% going to land on that yet, but that may be coming soon. So keep an eye out for that as well. We'll talk about small installations and bigger installations, and so we'll see some differences and scaling and all the things like that. So keep an eye out for that as well. But yeah, if you have ideas or things you want to talk about, please let me know, because I want to hear more from the community. I want to hear from you guys, things that you want to talk about, things, interesting things you're doing, because that's interesting to me and interesting to us as well. And I think it's interesting to other people in the community. They want to see what you're doing. So please share what you have. So thank you, everybody.
See you guys.
Thanks.
See you on the next one.